Hey, what's up guys? Welcome back to Switched-In. I'm Joshua, and today we are talking about this game right here, Mother Russia Bleeds, which, as you may have guessed from the title, is kind of a violent game. But before we dive into the gameplay of this hyper-violent beat-em-up and I sort of give my impressions after a few hours of play, first off, I should definitely point out that Special Reserve Games has done an incredible job with the physical release for this particular title. As you can see here, Special Reserve's commitment to quality absolutely remains, and the box of this looks absolutely stellar. I love the detail and the artwork on the front of this cover. And they threw in some bonus goodies like some stickers, a Mother Russia Bleeds patch, and then also an acrylic art print which looks absolutely wonderful on a shelf. And I think it's all these extras and that attention to detail that's really making Special Reserve Games kind of my favorite limited publisher right now. But hey, let's go ahead and talk about the game, because without the game, there wouldn't really be any reason for a physical release or anything like that. So let's go ahead and talk a little bit about what the gameplay is like in Mother Russia Bleeds. If you're a fan of beat-em-ups, and hyper-violent beat-em-ups at that, tend to be kind of your style. In a lot of ways, I would say Mother Russia Bleeds sort of sticks to the status quo for what you would expect from a beat-em-up. However, it does put a few fresh gameplay twists on what has historically been one of the most lambasted genres for being overly repetitive. At the outset, you have a selection of different characters that you can choose from, and each one of them has different strengths and weaknesses. Some characters are fast and light, but don't hit very hard, and then other characters are big, beefy, and slow, but pack a powerful punch. For my first playthrough and experience with Mother Russia Bleeds, I opted to go for Boris because he seemed like a fairly well-rounded character. Although I will say there was definitely a temptation to go with Natasha because she seems fast and light, and that's typically the playstyle that I prefer in a lot of action games. Mother Russia Bleeds obviously takes place in the Soviet Union in an alternate 1980s. And in the midst of a street fighting arena in the slums, there is a government raid, and mysteriously you find that your character has woken up in a horrifying laboratory that is positioned under a Russian prison. And making it all the more horrifying is that in this lab they are using humans as guinea pigs for a drug called Necro. And Necro, aside from being a plot point that sort of pushes the story forward, is also used directly as a gameplay mechanic. But let's not get too far ahead of ourselves. Once the game starts, you have some pretty basic tutorializing that happens that shows you how to punch, kick, jump, and grapple. But then as the plot ramps up, so too do the mechanics. Now, it's not exactly new ground for a beat-em-up to have special attacks or anything like that, but the way that Mother Russia Bleeds manage it is actually pretty interesting. Essentially, whenever you defeat enemies, sometimes they will start to convulse, which is pretty horrific in its own right, but a convulsing enemy can then be forcibly drained of the excess necro that is in their body, and then you can choose whether to use that necro that you've harvested from them either as a health boost if you start to get low on health, or as a means to go into like a berserker rage mode where your attacks are infinitely more powerful and you do tons more damage and can deal with a lot of enemies at once. And I think this is a really brilliant setup because historically in beat-em-ups, usually you would just perform a special attack at the expense of some health and that would be it. However, Mother Russia Bleeds makes this entire experience a little bit more tactical because you have to make judgment calls based on the situation as to whether or not you will 1. Risk trying to harvest from a downed enemy when you've got other enemies walking around, and 2. Deciding whether the necro harvested from your recently fallen foe will be best served bumping your health or just allowing you to go into a complete rage so you can deal with a larger than normal pack of enemies. And what makes this so brilliant is it's a way more nuanced approach to have the player sort of decide what they favor most in the moment, rather than simply picking up random pieces of pizza on the ground to refill their health, or hope that they haven't exhausted so much of their special energy that they're going to shoot themselves in the foot and ultimately get killed before they can progress. Putting the decision of how to balance aggression versus self-preservation in the player's hands is a really, really nice change of pace for this style of game. However, let's talk about that aggression for a second, because once you go into that rage mode, you can do some truly horrific attacks where every punch lands with just a complete ferocity, and this is helped tremendously by just some really stellar art direction where the animation just looks, for lack of a better term, punchy, and every attack feels like it has real weight to it. Also, I love that as you continue to beat down enemies, they don't just sort of flash and disappear like the beat-em-ups of yesteryear, but rather take visceral amounts of plainly visible damage as you continue to dispatch them. And honestly, in some cases, it's pretty gross. And all of that action plays out across a range of different stages that are different not just aesthetically or artistically speaking, but also mechanically. Sure, there are some staples like fighting in a prison or a nightclub, and even a moving train, which I'm fairly convinced is a throwback to Turtles in Time, but I have to say I think they went about this in a really smart way, making sure that not only just the environments that you fight in feel visually distinct from one another, but the fact that sometimes you might have to dodge a giant meat grinder, or make your character constantly jump to avoid incoming obstacles while you ride a speeding train. Go a long way towards making what is essentially a very short game feel really fleshed out. Not to mention the absolutely grisly range of attacks on offer here also go a long way towards making it feel fleshed out, albeit in a slightly grosser way. But all the action, fighting, shooting, and even fatalities aside, I was really surprised to see how much story there was in this game. And that was probably one of my chief draws to go ahead and pick this one up. Not because I was expecting an especially deep narrative or anything like this, but as a Devolver Digital release, I had to assume it was going to have this sort of dark humor that I can personally appreciate, and it would be a game that wouldn't take itself too seriously and have some fun with its writing and its characters, and it totally does. And I have to say, for for the most part, I've really enjoyed my time with Mother Russia Bleeds. It's not absolutely perfect, however. It does have some of the standard trappings of the beat-em-up genre, in that sometimes you can't exactly gauge where your character is relative to the opponent that you're trying to fight because of the way the lanes are positioned. And I'm not sure if this is a Switch-specific problem, but if you do happen to die, it seems like the load times really take a while to kind of get you back in the action, which can be a little bit off-putting. But despite those minor gripes, I would say that I'm still having a blast with Mother Russia Bleeds. It's fast, it's hyper-violent, it's got funny writing, the graphics have that deep-fried, crispy, kind of pixelated look that I tend to appreciate. And ultimately, I would say that if you were a fan of the beat-em-up genre too, you should totally check this out, provided you can stomach it and you don't mind the very mature content that's on offer here. Alright, so those are my thoughts on Mother Russia Bleeds. If you're a fan of beat-em-up, you're probably going to find something to like here, and even though a lot of it does feel like standard fare, they have a few clever twists that I think keep it mechanically interesting. So there you have it. As always, thank you so much for coming back to another episode here on Switch Den. We very much appreciate that. If you are new here and like Switch content, make sure you subscribe to the channel. Thank you again for watching. Have an amazing day, and we'll see you next time. Bye.